Hello, my name is Jakob Gerstl. It's a great pleasure to be able to present here at the joint CNOC and Nonella Lab Symposium. I'm a current CNOC fellow, and I'd really like to thank my fellow CNOC members and others at the Department of Neurosurgery and yet others for the help with this project, where we developed a tool for the customized estimation of the macroeconomic burden of 369 diseases. So this is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which was a resolution passed by the United Nations in 2015. And it outlined 17 interlinked global goals, which were designed to be a shared blueprint for a more peaceful and prosperous world in 2030. Of these 232 Sustainable Development Goal indicators, about 57 are health-related. And the regular monitoring of these is required to sustain policy focus. And an excellent example of continuous monitoring of disease burden has been through the Global Burden of Disease study, which will provide on a country level and on a regional level year-by-year data on incidence, prevalence, and disability-adjusted life years globally. And particularly the disability-adjusted life year, or the DALY, will be used in this talk, on which our economic model much builds. So the DALY is really the disease burden in years, and it's a combination of the years lived with disability and the premature mortality that happens due to a condition. So we can see here the life arc of this person who will live with a disability and then die at a premature age, and then they will have a certain DALY. And on a population level, this will allow you to assess the disease burden of a disease on a population, which will guide disease priority for policymakers. However, a lot of policymakers will request economic data specifically, and it's been shown that the absence of such data deters both policy priority and attention. So this was the guide by the WHO, which outlined various methods to estimate these macroeconomic disease burdens. And what we really wanted to do is use the different DALYs that have been determined by the Global Burden of Disease study and assign an economic unit to those years. And one recommended such approach is the value of lost welfare approach, which builds on this concept of value of statistical life. And that is the maximum monetary value an individual is willing to pay to prevent mortality. And that will take into account goods and services, but also value of health itself that might not be considered in a pure GDP per capita or a cost of illness approach. VSL has been empirically determined in a set of high-income countries, including the US, but in the vast majority of countries, VSL is missing. So we have to model the VSL for the countries where the data is missing. And to do that, we use the empirically determined VSL from the US, as determined by the Department of Transportation. We adjust that to a specific country's GDP per capita after purchasing power adjustment. And you can alter this adjustment using this parameter known as income elasticity. But the VSL also depends on the age at which an individual is. So at middle age, the VSL has been shown to be the highest, and the overall distribution of VSL has been shown to have this inverted U-shaped distribution. We also incorporated this loss function into our model. So using this, we started out by determining the disease burden of CNS cancer globally. And this was recently published, and it yielded this quite interesting regional distribution of welfare losses as a share of GDP. We then also worked with the Division of Plastic Surgery here with Dr. Ranganathan, where we revealed that the welfare losses as a share of GDP are much higher in low and middle income countries compared to high income countries for burns. And there's been a handful and an increasing literature using this model for other disease causes over the past 5-10 years. But they all will often consider either a select disease or a series of diseases. And that might not match what a policymaker, the data policymaker requires. And also, they will use different assumptions, which might hinder comparison between studies. So we sought to use the DALI data provided by the Global Burden of Disease study to allow a policymaker to make any custom assessment of disease burden for the years 2000 to 2019, and also under custom assumptions of VSL. So here is a little demo of our tool that we developed in Shiny Apps. So you can see the different disease causes here. It's defined by the GBD study. That can be set by country, region, or super region. And also according to year, and one can change the assumptions of VSL and willingness to pay in different countries and regions, and that will quite drastically change the data here, as you can see. So that really highlights also the need for these custom assessments. And if someone would have empirically determined VSL, that can also be used in our tool here. So in order to meet sustainable development goals, effective resource allocation of very limited resources is required. And this tool, we hope at least, will help policymakers guide their decision-making by being able to compare these different disease courses, countries, and use different assumptions that are local and address their particular policy needs. And I think a huge domain of future work is to further these empirical estimates of VSL to not overly rely on model data. And finally, I'd really like to thank my fellow members again, and some of them are here today, Jakob, Dr. Laws, and Dr. Smith. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just looking at the numbers. As I correctly, was it like 2% of laws, or like how could I interpret like the?
I don't think. No. Yeah, no, so for stroke, it's huge. And this is considering the entire disease burden of stroke, for example, in a region. And the counterfactual here is the absence of stroke in the population, right? So you can imagine, if you were to remove the entire disease burden of stroke, it's one of the most common causes of both morbidity and mortality, right, in the population. Yeah, but it won't only consider monetary loss, losses of output, but it's also what the value people assign to health itself, right? Yeah.